On the afternoon she first walked beyond the line of trees and dust, Neneva wore the same war attire she had worn across training fields and battle simulations, hardened armored fabric shaped tightly against her frame, open at the shoulders for movement, reinforced at the waist and thighs, metal laced through the seams to absorb impact, and no helmet to hide her face, allowing the rain-tempered air to touch her bronze skin, as her long waist-length hair moved freely down her back as she followed instinct rather than orders. She did not go alone out of weakness or fear, but out of curiosity. Her kind had already begun to weave themselves quietly into Earth's rhythm, some studying cities, some learning languages, some testing the strength of doors that opened without codes or guards, others walking through marketplaces and watching the careless softness of human life, while the ship rested hidden in the distance like a silent throat that still breathed. Neneva followed the scent of soil and movement. That was how she found the farm. A small, tired stretch of land where wooden fences leaned from years of weather, where animals moved without the sharp-eyed panic she was used to, and where a little human boy scattered feed for sheep, with more innocence than anything she had ever witnessed, until his eyes lifted and locked onto her unhidden form, tall, foreign, armored, her golden cat eyes reflecting light, and his fear burst free as he ran toward the house to call out for his father. Neneva did not retreat. She remained where she stood, hands open, posture neutral, body balanced to fight if she had to, though no weapon lived in her palms. The man who came out carried no armor, no visible fear, only caution shaped by curiosity, his eyes traveling over the unfamiliar design of her attire and the quiet intensity of her stance before he asked who she was, not as an accusation, but as a question meant to understand. "Neneva," she said. Her voice did not tremble. The man, Troy, hesitated only for a breath before inviting her inside like she was not an enemy at all, and it was there, in the simple warmth of a kitchen, that her world shifted, because the first bite of the hamburger he offered her tasted nothing like the sterilized, endlessly recycled synthetic nutrition of Skutazi, but rather like something violently alive, carrying heat, oil, and a flavor so real it nearly stunned her into silence. She ate slowly. She did not rush. She felt life in the taste. When Troy asked what she was, she did not hide, because Skutazians do not lie, and because she had never learned fear from truth. "I am not from here," she said. "I am Skutazian." Troy listened. He did not shout. He did not chase her away. He simply nodded as if the world had grown larger and stranger than he had ever imagined, and somehow that did not scare him as much as it should have. That night, she moved through the open land without fear, carrying leftover food wrapped in thin paper as if it were sacred, sharing it among those of her kind who were already learning human streets, human sounds, human smells, while lights flickered in distant houses and Earth continued breathing peacefully, unaware it was being walked quietly by warriors from another sky. The next day, she returned to the farm without hesitation, her war attire still hugging her frame, still marked by scratches only visible beneath light, and she asked if she could work, not because she had been ordered to, but because her body was trained to serve purpose, to pull engines apart, to lift iron, to push broken machines back into life. Troy, because James was not there that morning, agreed. He watched in disbelief as she mastered heavy equipment, her hands moving with instinct rather than instruction, lifting what most human women never touched, controlling weight and torque with the same ease she had once used to move weapons, while other females of her world began appearing across nearby lands, learning jobs, assisting strangers, blending quietly, not stuck inside metal walls, but walking freely through earth as if freedom had been hollowed out waiting for them. And when James eventually arrived from school, watching her from the edge of the field with quiet, unfamiliar tension in his chest, he had not yet liked her. Not yet. But he would.
The first time Troy truly noticed her was not when his son came running inside in panic, nor when she stood motionless in the yard like a creature born from a forgotten dream of war, but when he watched the way she examined the soil with her bare fingers, turning dark earth slowly, while her war gear caught the afternoon light. And he realized she was not looking at the land like a tourist or a stranger, but like someone who understood what it meant to survive from it. Neneva did not smile often, and she certainly did not soften herself for the comfort of human eyes. But there was a quiet gravity to the way she moved through the farm that unsettled and fascinated Troy in equal measure. She carried herself like someone who had known battle, loss, discipline, and silence. Yet she tilted her head when James laughed, and stood still when the wind moved through the fields, as if she were memorizing the freedom in the air. She remained in her war attire always, self-cleansing, armored fabric firm against her warrior-built body, patterned with faint markings from a world that had never been gentle, open at the shoulders, open at the sides, made for speed, for survival. A hardened thread running down her spine like the memory of a blade. And without her helmet, her waist-length green hair fell freely behind her, moving like a living banner of something beautiful that had grown out of ruin. The soft afternoon sun made her bronze skin glow in a way Earth had never seen before. The farm became a strange kind of sanctuary, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Troy noticed the way Neneva lifted metal parts and rusted tools that would have broken the backs of human workers, how she carried bags of grain with one arm while guiding machinery with the other, how she learned the hum of engines, the temper of animals, the stubbornness of old wood, and how she worked as though she finally had permission to exist without being commanded. Meanwhile, the others of her kind moved freely through the world, walking through small towns just before dusk, learning the patterns of sidewalks and conversations, working, helping, learning how to cook, wearing borrowed clothes over their armor when needed. Not hiding in fear, but walking freely, as if freedom had been waiting for them all along. Neneva had been sent to Earth to serve a mission, but the Earth was not behaving like an enemy world, and Troy was not behaving like a target. He was kind in ways that confused her. He did not command. He did not strike. He did not demand silence. Instead, he asked about her hands when he noticed the faint scars across her knuckles, brought her cold water when sweat traced down her neck, and watched her with eyes filled not with control, but curiosity. He never asked her to remove her armor, and that mattered more than he knew. At night, when she returned to the hidden ship, she listened to the others whisper about cities, about laughter inside buildings, about music that vibrated through bones, about food that tasted like joy instead of survival. And something inside Neneva began to splinter quietly, the border between duty and desire growing thinner each day she walked back to the farm. But her story did not begin on Earth. Her story began beneath a pink sun that burned cruelty into the sky. Before Earth had grass, before Troy knew her name, before James stared at her in fear and wonder, on Skutazi. She had been born under war banners, not stars. Her first memory was heat, endless, violent heat. Sandstorms screaming across bone-dry land, deadly creatures moving across dunes, and the sound of women training until their voices broke into silence. She had been trained before she learned to laugh, punched toward perfection, starved toward strength, taught that her body was a weapon and her heart a weakness. The males of her world had never loved. They claimed, they used, they commanded. And still the women kept the planet alive. They fought the beasts, they guarded the borders, and somehow they were blamed when children stopped being born. When the council gathered beneath scorched stone towers, their voices were never soft, and the decision that would break their world was made without the women's consent. They would be sent away, not to live, not to choose, but to lure, to touch, to taste, to return, and bear what their world could no longer produce. Neneva did not cry when her name was chosen. Warriors were not trained to cry. She only stood very still, as something inside her went silent. The desert of Skutazi taught her that softness was a myth, tenderness a defect, love a danger. She grew up watching women bury their exhaustion, watching their hands crack from weapons training, watching warriors return from battle only to be treated like tools, stored away when no longer useful. By the time she understood the quiet grief in her mentor's eyes, she was already too disciplined to question it. The crisis came slowly, not in screams, not in fire, but in empty cribs and pregnancies that never came, and bloodlines fading like dust in wind. A species dies not always by violence, but by indifference.
The elders called it fate. The warriors called it betrayal. But the truth was simpler. Women who are never loved do not bring life into a world that treats them like cages. And so the council chose survival over compassion. They would not fix the cruelty. They would not change the system. They would only export it. 20 warriors chosen for strength, beauty, endurance, emotional restraint, were told they would be heroes, told they would save their planet, told their bodies were bridges to distant species. Neneva did not protest. She had been trained not to. They stripped away her name, gave her a function, and placed her in a vessel that felt like a moving coffin of cold metal and artificial stars. For 3 years she crossed silent space with nothing but simulations, memory suppression, and a mission she was forbidden to question. Earth was not meant to be beautiful. It was meant to be useful. But it was beautiful. Green, alive, soft, dangerous in a different, breathtaking way. When the ship hid itself in distant soil, it was meant to be cold, efficient. Instead, it became a sanctuary for daughters who had never known life without armor pressing against their bones. They spread out, not like invaders, but like lost daughters. Neneva adapted faster than she should have. She learned the sound of leaves before they fell, learned human clouds and their careless beauty, learned that Earth's animals did not fear her. And when she found the farm, she crossed the most dangerous line of all, the line between duty and desire. Troy noticed the change before she did. He noticed her outfit shift, the red and white plaid shirt, the distressed denim shorts clinging to her hips, that she stayed longer, asked gentler questions, let James lean against her leg without fear, paused in the fields as if relearning how to breathe. The first time he touched her was accidental, a brush of fingers when handing her a tool, the faintest contact. But to someone who knew touch only as command or correction, it felt like falling into deep water without warning. She froze. He apologized. She didn't understand why. That night, lying awake in the ship, surrounded by others, slowly softening, slowly changing, she tried to remind herself that warmth was chemical, attachment was weakness, the mission untouched. But it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like hunger for something she had never been allowed to name. Back on the farm, Troy noticed the contradictions inside her. The strength that could move mountains, paired with a gentleness she revealed only in stolen moments. He saw the way she washed soil from vegetables, how James adored her without hesitation. To him, she wasn't alien. She was extraordinary. And slowly, without ceremony, Troy began to fall in love with her. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she was powerful, though she frightened him quietly. But because she had never once tried to be anything other than what she was in his fields. Neneva felt it. She pretended she didn't, because the council had never trained her for love, and love had never been part of the mission.
For months, the little farming town had lived in a kind of quiet wonder. People had noticed unusual things, strange footprints near the riverbank, tall silhouettes moving at dusk, machines being lifted by hands too slender and too strong to belong to any human woman. The farmers whispered, the market women wondered, and slowly, curiosity turned into reports, and reports turned into alerts, until word reached the central government. At first, the government did not believe it. Earth had grown used to satellites spotting everything, to cameras capturing every passing moment, to the comfort of thinking nothing truly surprising could appear without warning. But when 3 different towns filed the same description, tall women, bronze skin, cat-like eyes, impossible strength, unfamiliar speech, leaders realized they weren't dealing with drunken stories or desert mirages. They were dealing with something new. And so, one quiet morning, without warning, the sky above the farmland broke into noise as government helicopters swept over the valley. Their shadows stretched long across the fields, darkening the sheep pasture and the rows of corn. Men in black uniforms moved swiftly through the tall grass, forming circles that grew smaller with every step. The Skutazi women sensed the movement long before they saw it. Their senses, sharpened by years of training on a harsh planet, reacted instantly. They gathered, not in fear, but in awareness, alert, curious, calm. They did not raise weapons. They had no weapons. They only had the bodies they were born with, built for survival, built for war, but now longing for peace. Neneva stood among them, her waist-length green hair blowing softly in the morning breeze, her skin glinting under the sunlight. She watched as soldiers approach, hundreds of them, surrounding the farmland with a caution that came from uncertainty rather than hatred. James, standing near the window of his home, saw the soldiers first. His small face pressed against the glass, eyes filling with worry. He rushed outside, running to Neneva with all the fear a child could carry. "Neneva, they're coming! They have big cars and guns!" Hurry hurried out behind him, placing a protective arm across his son's shoulder. But Neneva did not look frightened. She crouched to James' height, smoothing her armored glove gently over his hair, and said in a calm, steady voice that made the fear in his chest shrink, "No harm will come. They only wish to understand." And she stood again, tall and unshaken, her presence so steady that even the soldiers slowed their steps. Return to narrative tone, controlled tension. The leading officer approached her carefully, gripping his weapon but lowering it slightly when he saw she wasn't preparing to strike. He said, "Identify yourselves," firmly, although there was a tremor beneath his words, the tremor of a man confronting the unknown. Neneva stepped forward, speaking on behalf of all her sisters. "We are Skutazi. We have come from our world. We mean no harm. No lies, no tricks, simply truth."
The soldiers exchanged confused glances. The officer exhaled slowly, then nodded. "You'll have to come with us, all of you." And the women agreed. Not because they were weak, not because they feared, but because they understood something important. Peace required trust, and trust required openness. So they followed the soldiers, not as prisoners, not as enemies, but as guests, willing to be known. The government facility they were brought to was large but not cold, made of smooth white walls and quiet corridors that hummed with machinery. It had been designed for research, not imprisonment, with glass observation rooms, laboratories, rest areas, and long hallways with scientists that stared in amazement at the new arrivals.
The women were examined with respectful caution. Doctors checked their vital signs, shaking their heads at readings that seemed impossible. Linguists tried to trace the structure of their language. Anthropologists observed their behavior, how they moved in tight groups, how they reacted to unfamiliar environments, how protective they were of one another. But the biggest surprise came not from the scientific tests, but from the way the Skutazian women interacted with the staff. One woman, Shippa, noticed a nurse struggling to push a medical cart full of heavy equipment. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, lifted it effortlessly with one hand, and pushed it down the hallway with a polite nod. Another woman, Vronza, sat with a young technician who was visibly nervous, sharing her food and talking in slow, simple English learned just days before. The guards, expecting hostility, received nothing but calm respect. The scientists, expecting resistance, found cooperation. The world, expecting danger, discovered grace. By the third day, Dr. Carver, the director of the facility, stood before the government board with an expression that held both confusion and admiration. "These women are not a threat," he announced. "In fact, in many ways, they are gentler than us." Once clearances were granted and trust was gradually forming, the government allowed the Skutazian women to return briefly to their ship for a private meeting. Escorted, observed, but not restrained, the women entered the starship that had carried them across galaxies. The interior was familiar to them, metal floors glowing with faint blue light, screens filled with Skutazi script, the quiet hum of engines that once had been their entire world. They had lived on this ship for years. They had suffered inside its walls, trained inside its cold chambers, dreamed of escape while staring at its ceilings. And now, standing inside it again, they realized how small it felt. Dubita, the ship commander, waited at the central console. Her armor was the darkest among them, heavy with the weight of leadership. Her expression was stern, but her eyes held something softer than usual, a trembling softness born from months spent watching her sisters change on Earth. "My sisters, we were sent to Earth for a mission designed by the elders of Skutazi. We were told our planet was dying, that our purpose was to save our species by finding partners on foreign worlds. But the elders never cared for us. They saw us as tools, not women. They gave us life, but denied us choice." The women listened, breaths held,
hearts pounding with memories of the world they had fled. I have watched you all breathe freely for the first time. I have seen joy on faces that never knew what joy felt like. I have seen strength used to build, not destroy. She stepped forward, placing her armored hand over the glowing main console. We will no longer be bound to Skutazi. Gasps filled the room. I am cutting off communication with the High Council. They will no longer control us. They will no longer track us. From this moment onward, every woman standing here chooses her own future. The lights on the console shifted from blue to red, signaling disconnection. The line that once tied them to their desert home snapped silently. No alarms, no warnings, just freedom. A freedom none of them had ever imagined tasting. You may return to Skutazi if your heart calls you, Dubita said softly. But the mission ends. We will not steal from Earth. We will not harm Earth. We will live here as we choose. The women embraced one another, some laughing, some crying, some standing in stunned silence, realizing they had just been given the one thing Skutazi had denied them for generations: choice. And Neneva already knew her choice. The sky outside was turning orange when she stepped off the ship and walked back toward the farm. Her face glowed in the fading light, and her hair moved like a green ribbon behind her. She followed the familiar path, her steps light, her heart full. James was the first to see her, and he ran with unrestrained joy, throwing his arms around her waist. "You're back! I knew you'd come back!" Neneva lifted him gently, holding him as if he were made of starlight. "I told you, I will always return," she said softly. Troy approached more slowly. He looked at her with relief, but also with uncertainty. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly. "You don't owe us anything." Neneva stepped close enough that he could see the softness in her usually fierce eyes. "I stay not because I must, but because my heart feels alive here." Troy let out a breath he had been holding for days. And then, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky turned gold and pink, Neneva reached up, touching his face with a hand that once held weapons, but now held only tenderness. "I choose this life. I choose this world. And I choose you." The wind moved softly around them, carrying the smell of earth and evening grass. Troy leaned in, slowly at first, giving her room to step back. But she didn't. She closed the space between them, her forehead brushing his, her breath warm against his lips. And then she kissed him, a long, gentle human kiss that tasted like freedom, like hope, like the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined. It was the taste of an alien's kiss, and it was beautiful.